Chapter 4. Tizir Madakin and the barbarian crouched, pinned against the window by guardsmen in the Baron's hall. The grey tracing of the outer wall plunged 7 stories, only to disappear at the waterline. Moonlight winked from the surface of the moat. Groggy from blood loss and beatings, Tizir scrambled awkwardly to the sill. An arrow bounced from its ledge. The sentries blurred to an advancing mass of swords and bows, and Tizir's shadow-clotted senses forced realization upon him. I'm too weak to climb quickly. They'll shoot me before I reach the ground. Still unwilling to surrender, he eased his toes into cracks in the wall stones. The barbarian dove through the window. A broad sweep of the huge man's arm slammed into Tizir, toppling him, and an arrow pierced the air where the thief had been. Tizir plummeted. Wind howled in his ears. He flailed for a handhold, but his fingers sliced only air. He curled to a ball and crashed into the moat. Impact dazed him, jarred agony through his aching limbs. Its shimmering murk swallowed him. Foam spewed, red-stained from the reopened wound in his shoulder. His own weight dragged him deeper. He clawed blindly, trying to swim, but pain and exhaustion robbed him of strength, and the dark, greedy water stole all sense of direction. Dizzied and air-starved, he fought for consciousness. His limbs felt lead-weighted. Pain seared his throat, forcing him to breathe, and water funneled into his mouth. Suddenly, the barbarian's thick fingers closed on Tizir's wrist. A steady pull drew Tizir to the surface. Air rushed into his raw throat, choking him. He felt the barbarian's grip shift to his hair and chin, and, with strong swimming strokes, drag him landward. Tizir lay still, feeling water sluice around him, until the barbarian released him, limp and sputtering on the grass-cushioned bank. Above Tizir, the moon and stars appeared like rents in night's fabric. Then the barbarian's craggy face blocked his view of the sky. He met soft, lead-colored eyes which seemed oddly caring. My father's eyes were gray. Though irrelevant, the thought clung to Tizir's clouded mind. Memories of his father's words spun through his mind like a song he could not suppress. A man becomes a hero when he continues fighting, though he no longer cares if he dies. The thought raised a faint flicker of determination, and with the re-emergence of will came urgency. He staggered to his feet, and a fit of coughing doubled him over. Come on! His voice sounded hoarse as a whisper. Catching the barbarian's arm, he sprinted across cleared ground into the town proper. The other man followed. Tizir traversed Cullensburg's roads from habit. The streets appeared to have grown to endless bleak tunnels, empty save for his own footfalls and the barbarian's warm breath on his scalp. Every step jarred pain through him. Each tortured breath burned from the grime and water in his lungs. Wind whipped through the alleyways, cutting beneath the dripping tatters of his clothes. His pace had dropped to a painful jog when he rounded the corner, Panogaya Street, and stopped at the back door of Shylar's whorehouse. He pounded with both fists. Seconds dragged into eons. A tentative answering tap sounded from the opposite side of the door. Tizir's vision hazed to a gray plain. He forced all his concentration into raising a trembling hand. His head buzzed, making sounds so he could not discern his sequence of knocks. 2, pause, 2, pause, 3. The scrape of the opening bolt seemed distant. The door swung inward, and Shylar studied Tizir and his companion in the moon's wavering light. Shadow? Tizir fixed his jaw to speak. Vertigo buffeted him to oblivion, and he collapsed in Shylar's arms. For 7 days, Tizir lay senseless on a cot in Shylar's whorehouse. Young, beautiful women tended his wounds, and, in his brief moments of lucidity, fed him. But to Tizir, the recurring dream memory forced upon him seemed far more real. Caught within his own recollection, he knew himself as a child on the day of his father's execution. He recalled the older man's eyes, and their gray gleam of urgency which goaded Tizir to action. He re-experienced the father-driven frenzy which had sent him racing through Cullensburg streets. Locked in his dream, Tizir relived a pause to catch his breath, and heard the soft verbal exchange of passing guardsmen. At the time, sorrow and outrage had trained their words of meaning. Now, comatose in Shylar's whorehouse, Tizir's mind forced details upon him which he had long suppressed from memory. This time the guardsman's conversation came to Tizir clearly. One, pinch-faced and drawn, spoke in a voice colored with surprise. Didn't you know? They locked him in the dungeon. He battered Illyrian, grabbed him by the throat and made him admit he falsified reports, even got him to say he set the whole thing up with the messenger. The other guard shook his head. Illyrian said that. The first man spat. Sure, he probably would have taken full responsibility for poverty, crime, and the war with the bastard's fingers locked on his neck. Tazir's thoughts focused. Gradually, the image faded. He pictured Illyrian's dark, curled hair and rodent-like features, and recalled the words the nobleman had spoken in the Baron's dungeon. Years ago, your father menaced my rise to power. You can see which of us was destroyed by it. No doubt, the charges against Tazir's father had been contrived by Illyrian. Tazir's callous fingers twisted the bedsheets. Grief dissolved before black raged. Karana, damn you, viper! His screamed curse echoed through Shilar's hall. The next blood spilt, Illyrian, will be yours. Through a haze of delirium, Tazir dove upon the Illyrian figure in his dream. Wildly, Tazir flailed. One punch met flesh, then a second. Words buzzed into his ear, unintelligible in the blur between nightmare, memory, and reality. Fingers encircled his wrists. He fought blindly. The grip on his skin tightened, pinning him to the bed. Tazir howled, twisting and kicking beneath the coverlet. He opened his eyes. Darkness shattered to sudden clarity. The barbarian hovered over him, gaze soft with almost motherly concern. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth where one of Tazir's frantic blows had landed. Karana's endless hell, what have I done? Tazir shook his head to disperse the last remnants of dizziness. I'm all right now. He studied the walls, recognizing the warped gray paint of one of Shilar's second-floor workrooms. Aside from his cot and the barbarian, the room stood empty. The barbarian's grip relaxed. He sat cross-legged on the floor before Tazir, his voice emerged in a deep sing-song. Feel better. Shocked by the barbarian's use of the barony's language, Tazir grimaced. Yes, sorry I hit you. I must have been dreaming. The barbarian tilted his blond head soberly, but said nothing. Tazir made a sweeping gesture. You speak our language. The barbarian made no reply. Apparently, he saw no need to address Tazir's self-evident statement. Tazir pressed further. How, and why didn't you speak with me in the dungeon? I learned your tongue from a man who wintered with my people. The barbarian answered Tazir's questions in turn. And talking with you would have been unwise. The guards spoke freely in my presence because they assumed I could not understand their language. I dared not take a chance they might hear us. Tazir nodded. The barbarian's explanation seemed plausible. My name's Tazir Madakin. The corners of the barbarian's mouth twitched upward. He started to speak. His lips split wide, and he laughed with enough force to steal his breath. With effort, Tazir shifted position to support his weight on an elbow. Why are you laughing? Convulsed with mirth, the barbarian gave no answer. The barbarian's antics turned Tazir defensive. His tone went crisp with annoyance. Tazir is a fine name. It was my father's name, and his father's name. The barbarian caught his breath. He forced words around snickers. What does it mean? Mean? Tazir raked his hand through his tangled black hair. It doesn't mean anything. The barbarian collapsed in another paroxysm of laughter. How can a name mean nothing? And why do the women call you Shadow? Tazir bit his lip, attributing the barbarian's reaction to cultural differences and a dull mentality. Because. He paused, then chose the simplest option. Because that's what Tazir means. It means shadow. He considered, realizing his cover no longer mattered. And Madakin means climber. Regaining his composure, the barbarian settled back into his position by Tazir's cot. I am Moonbear. The irony was not lost on Tazir. He slapped his palms over his face. I just defended my name to a barbarian called Moonbear. He lowered his hands to his sides, glad to change the subject. Thanks for saving my life in the Baron's moat. I owe you. Moonbear's face creased with puzzlement. You were drowning. Tazir flushed. I know. You rescued me. Thank you. Moonbear stared. You were drowning. You would have died. You owe me nothing. Tazir nodded his small hands, slightly offended. Are you suggesting my life is worthless? Moonbear seemed taken aback. He stammered. I would never think to put gold value on a person's life. You were drowning. I could save you. If I did not, it would be as if I murdered you. Moonbear's reasoning made little sense to Tazir. Luckily for me, you didn't seem to mind murdering the prison guard. Moonbear rocked in place. He spoke slowly. I do not murder enemies. I kill them. He was an enemy. You are a friend. Tazir considered. Moonbear's definition of friend seems rather loose. Not wishing to appear ungrateful, he kept the thought to himself and abandoned the point. Fine, friend. How long have we been here? 7 days. Just 7 days? Tazir jabbed his hands beneath the coverlet, feeling the healing scars and scabs from his torture in the Baron's dungeon beneath the coarse fabric of an unfamiliar tunic. His shoulder no longer ached. Shylar's voice echoed Moonbear's answer. 7 days. She slipped into the room, her plaid frock weaving about her hips. Too long. Her voice held an unaccustomed harshness. Tonight, you both must go. Tazir tensed to speak, but Moonbear's voice cut above his like a whip crack. No, Shadow's too sick. He's not ready to travel. Shylar hissed. Tonight, you overgrown rag doll. I can't risk any more. Not even for... She met Tazir's confused stare, and tension seemed to dissolve from her. You, Shadow. Tazir worked to a sitting position. Quiet, both of you. I awaken after 7 days, and all you two can do is ridicule me and yell at each other. Shylar? Gaze fixed on her shoes, Shylar mumbled, Good to have you back, Shadow. She clasped his hand, squeezing affectionately. Forgive me. The last few days have been difficult. Wondering what antics of Moonbear's might have angered Shylar, Tazir rolled his eyes toward the barbarian. Apparently guessing Tazir's concern, Shylar shook her head. No, Moonbear's a pleasant enough guest, but I don't think he understands the gravity of this situation. With a crooked wink at Tazir, she tapped her head to indicate some concern about Moonbear's intelligence. Neither, I fear, do you. Nausea passed through Tazir. He leaned forward. They got Agaron's chalice back, and they punished me thoroughly. He shrugged. Soon enough, the town will forget. Of course, I'll need another alias. He laughed alone. Shylar caught both of Tazir's forearms, her dark eyes fixed on his face. Sentries combed the borders of Cullensburg, letting no one in or out. Patrols in town have trebled. Yesterday, the Baron started searching homes for the two of you. Shadow, he's put 5,000 weight in gold on your heads. I didn't know the Baron had that much money. Tazir's eyes widened in disbelief. 3 times the value of the chalice for a thief and a barbarian? It makes no sense. Why? With a heavy sigh, Shylar released Tazir. No one seems to know, not even the guards. Whatever the reason, I can't risk having you here any longer. Numerous people pass through every day. For 5,000 weight in gold, even one of my girls might talk. Too many lives and jobs depend on this house. A raid here would destroy the underground, and my life. Tazir flinched. Say no more. I understand. We'll leave tonight. Moonbear snarled. No. The sudden explicative startled Tazir. He's too sick to travel. Tazir swung his legs over the side of the cot. I'm fine. To demonstrate, he stood. His vision blurred and spun. Weak as twigs, his legs collapsed beneath him. He crashed to the floor. Shylar and Moonbear glared at one another. Each caught one of Tazir's arms and hoisted him to the bed. Shylar's wrinkled countenance softened. You have 2 more days. Striding toward the door, she added, And may Mardane protect us all. She left the room. The door slammed closed behind her. Tazir spent a restless night on his cot in Shylar's whorehouse, plagued by the thought of a bounty of such nonsensical proportion. None of my thefts warrant such effort. As for Moonbear, the barbarian wars ended 5 years ago. I know of no major hostility since that time. Tazir rolled to his side, but sleep remained elusive. An image of Illyrian's face formed in his mind, and his skin washed cold with sweat. The memory of his dream returned. Tazir fought down hatred. I can't condemn a man on a suspicion. Tazir flipped to his other side, noticing, for the first time, Moonbear lying on a pallet beside him. Limp strands of hair had fallen over the barbarian's face, and Tazir watched them dance with each of Moonbear's breaths. Carefully, Tazir lowered his feet to the floor. Dizziness crushed in on him, but this time he managed to remain standing. With the broad-based, deliberate tread of a toddler, he paced. I will confront Illyrian and assure myself of his guilt. Then I must avenge my father's death. Strengthened by his decision, Tazir returned to his bed. But almost immediately, doubts gnawed at his mind. The brave, new oath he had sworn ached in him like a burden. Pledging violence even against his father's murderer seemed to undermine the morals he'd embraced since childhood. The idea of killing repulsed him, but his vow of vengeance would not be banished. Even if I perform no act against the traitor, I need to prove his guilt. I owe it to my father's memory. I owe it to my mother, and I owe it to myself. The muscles of Tazir's jaw clamped tight. He forced them to relax, feeling his limbs uncoil simultaneously. Though still burdened by his decision, sleep finally came to him. A weak beam of sunlight streamed through the open crack of the doorway, awakening Tazir. He sat up. Beside him, Moonbear sprawled in a chair, binding a turkey feather fletching to a smooth and sharpened shaft. A table before him held half a dozen similar arrows, and a ceramic bowl with steam rising. A grain and honey smell twined through the room. Moonbear smiled. "Good morning. Porridge?" He gestured toward the dish. Tazir yawned and stretched. He scratched his side, feeling each rib. "Good morning, Moonbear." Rising, he crossed the room, took the bowl, and returned to his palate. The ceramic felt warm in his hands. Inside, the creamy white cereal striped with raw brown honey looked inviting. A wooden spoon jutted from the mixture. Grasping it, Tazir stirred. Silently, Moonbear continued his craft. Tazir scooped a spoonful of porridge into his mouth, and its warmth suffused him. "So, where you from?" Moonbear never looked up. "North." Tazir scraped with his spoon. "North, huh?" He smiled. "Danwald Wilderness?" Moonbear shook his head. "We call it Danemark. And no, I am from farther north across the sea in a kingdom known as Sweden." Tazir put his breakfast aside, surprised by Moonbear's revelation. Stories abounded about the magical lands across the Kattegat, tales of sorcerers, dragons, and golden-haired pirates. "I know of no hostilities between Cullinsburg and the lands across the sea." Moonbear snorted. "Only because the Baron has no ships. We came to visit our cousins in Danemark, but Cullinsburg's guards murdered my friends and locked me in the Baron's castle. When I killed a soldier trying to get free, they threw me in their dungeon." He waved a hand in disgust, redirecting the conversation. "Shylark gave me something you may need." He reached into a fold of his cloak, withdrew a dagger, and gently tossed it onto Tazir's cot. Amused by Moonbear's bastardization of Shylar's name, Tazir examined the slim, tapered blade. A bright strip of steel traced the edges, indicating recent sharpening. Its tooled leather grip felt worn and comfortable in his fist. Moonbear watched with apparent interest. "You're not a warrior, are you, Shadow?" Tazir picked up his bowl of porridge, finding the question gross understatement. "No, I'm a merchant." Taking a spoonful of the cooling mixture, he chewed thoughtfully. "The barbarian has twice saved my life. I owe him the truth, at least. Actually, I'm a thief. The rest of the barony knows it now, so why shouldn't you?" "A thief?" Moonbear set aside his finished arrow, looking genuinely puzzled. "What is a thief?" Tazir stared incredulous. Innocence as simple and complete as Moonbear seemed inconceivable, but the sincerity of the barbarian's question could not be denied. It unsettled Tazir, inspiring a shame he had not felt since his early days among the street gang. While he considered his answer, his mind wandered to a memory from 6 years ago. He sat with Rabbit on a warehouse roof, watching the closing time bustle of Cullinsburg's market. They played a familiar game in which they guessed the contents of each passerby's pockets. Tazir swung his legs, feeling pensive. "So, Rabbit," he asked cautiously, "does stealing things ever make you feel bad?" Rabbit did not hesitate. "No. Do I want to know why you're asking?" Young Tazir replied, knowing from past experience he could speak openly with Rabbit. "Sometimes I don't like it. I think maybe I'm eating tonight because I made someone else go hungry." He paused thoughtfully. "Ever wish you had an honest occupation?" "You mean would I like to be the Baron's son, live in a castle, have my meals served by gorgeous women, and wallow in riches?" Rabbit's tone went blatantly sarcastic. "No, Taz. I prefer to live in an alley, feast on rats, and bathe in sewage troughs." Tazir grumbled, feeling betrayed by the one person with whom he felt comfortable enough to reveal his private thoughts. "Sorry I asked." Rabbit sighed. "All right, yes. Don't say nothing to Blade, but sometimes it bothers me too." His forehead creased with thought. "Then I remember Baron and some of the others who's been caught by the guards. If they can kill without caring, I can steal. The Baron's soldiers slaughter barbarians every day. You think it bothers them?" Tazir recalled his father's sobering descriptions of war. "It bothered my father." "Really?" Rabbit seemed unconvinced. "Well, maybe he was as crazy as his son." "What is a thief?" Moonbear repeated, jarring Tazir from his reverie. Tazir swallowed. "I take things from other people." Moonbear shrugged. "Good. If you need things more, they should give them to you. You should not have to take anything." Moonbear's words confused Tazir. Uncertain how to address such a statement, he pondered a reply. Abruptly, a high-pitched scream shrilled through the whorehouse hallway, followed by a second. Dropping his handiwork, Moonbear sprinted for the door. Feathers spiraled from his lap, floating to the floor in a wash of gray-barred brown. Tazir hollered, "Wait, you can't—" But Moonbear wrenched open the door and galloped into the hall as another shriek rent the air. Muttering blasphemies, Tazir followed unsteadily. The room emptied into a hallway. At the farther end stood 3 iron-bossed doors, one slightly ajar. From the room beyond came a pained whine and then a woman's voice, pleading. Like an enraged beast, Moonbear charged through the portal. The door slammed against the wall. Still some distance behind, Tazir glanced through the entryway. A thick-muscled man, partially dressed in the red and black breeks of the Baron's guards, shook a naked woman. Her head bobbed. She screamed again. Early bruises colored her torso. Moonbear, wait! Tazir's hand slid to the dagger in his belt. Moonbear leaped. He seized the guard's shoulder, spinning the man like a toy. The guardsman's back struck the wall. Surprise crossed his features. His right hand raked toward his sword. Moonbear punched. His fist crashed into the guard's gut. Breath rushed from the guardsman. His face went blank as a mask, and he dropped to the floor. Moonbear turned to the woman. She clung to Moonbear, sobbing against his chest. He smoothed her hair, whispering words Tazir could not hear from the doorway. The guard's eyes flickered open. Silently he crouched. Tazir heard the rasp of a drawn sword. Steel flashed as the guardsman regained his feet and rushed toward Moonbear's unshielded back. A cry of warning caught in Tazir's throat. He forced the word between his lips. No! The guard twisted toward him. Tazir sprang. The knife slid in his sweaty grip. Realizing his peril, the guard redirected his strike. Tazir raised his arm to drive his dagger through the guard's defense. Suddenly, his mind colored the blade scarlet with his mother's blood. Panic pulled his strike short. He dodged aside, and the guard's sword whistled by his head. Moonbear whirled. His punch hurled the guard against the wall. Bones snapped. The guard's dark eyes glazed, and he sank lifeless to the floor. Tazir staggered, smothered by vivid visions of his mother's slaying. Horror wrenched the dagger from his grip. His pulse pounded in his head. Red haze pressed his vision. Sound tumbled against his ears, blending into a meaningless cacophony. Shylar's reedy voice was the only thing which threaded through his consciousness. Out! Out now! Kirana's darkest hell, you've ruined us all! Tazir clung desperately to his failing sanity. His voice emerged beaten and flat. We're gone, he said. Chapter 5. Rain poured from the morning sky and pattered on the porch steps of Cullenberg's alehouse, soaking Tazir and Moonbear, who huddled underneath the porch. Tazir pulled his borrowed cloak higher over his head, attentive to the roadway to his right and his parallel alley to his left. His gaze followed a beggar woman in a shaggy weather-stained frock. Water plastered thinning white hair to her face. Seemingly oblivious, she meandered through the alleyway, stooping occasionally to stir a finger through the sewage trough set between the roadstones. Tazir crouched, peeking around the chipped paint of the stairs to the turbulent sky. Clouds formed a gray net across the horizon, bleak as his thoughts. The guard would have slain Moonbear. Tazir's throat tightened. I owe Moonbear my life, but I couldn't kill to save his. Nausea slithered through Tazir's gut. He buried his face in his palms, trying to banish the memory of his mother's blood, purple red and smelling of death. The smooth glide of his dagger through flesh seemed vividly real. I've lied, conned, and stolen. I can move without a sound through spaces scarcely large enough for a cat, and I can climb almost anything. I've taught myself to dodge confrontations and violence. His hand dropped to the hilt of the knife tucked in the sash beneath his cloak. But I'm a fugitive now. I need to learn to kill. The realization sent a shiver of dread through him. Apparently sensing Tazir's distress, Moonbear squeezed his companion's thin wrist. Are you well? Tazir gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to share his remorse. It would be like expecting sympathy for hunting deer from a guard lion. Avoiding Moonbear's gaze, he watched the beggar woman track a piece of human excrement with the interest of a child with a toy boat in the river. My father was the most moral man I know, yet even he could kill. Tazir lowered his head. Moonbear's grip tightened. He whispered, Listen. Tazir jerked his head up, stiffening. Above the ceaseless cadence of the rain, he heard the slap of footsteps in the alleyway. Glad for the distraction, Tazir motioned at Moonbear to flatten himself against the wall, shifted to one knee, and craned around the alehouse steps until he could spy on the entire length of the alley. 3 of Cullenberg's guardsmen entered the far end of the alley. dressed in a coarse black shirts and breeks which indicated they were on duty. Wind flicked open their red cuffs. Water slicked the leather hilts and sheaths of the swords that jutted from their waistbands. Tazir retreated behind the stairs. This way. He caught Moonbear's sleeve, drawing the barbarian around the alehouse to the parallel roadway, grateful for the rain which kept the streets barren despite the hour. A 5,000 weight gold bounty would translate a glimpse from any citizen of Collinsburg into instant capture. Stay here. Tazir's tone left no room for argument. He scrambled up the alehouse wall, flattened to its sod roof, and watched the guardsmen beneath him. As the soldiers approached the beggar woman, she rose from her sport. One of the men pointed. "Hey, Hildegard, I didn't know your mother was out here." Another guard snickered. He spoke in a high-pitched jeer. "Ah, Adlar, that's not his mother." Seizing the woman by an arm, he jerked her toward the man who had not yet spoken. "It's his wife." Angered by the guardsman's play, Tazir curled his hands into fists. Wet grasses drenched the front of his cloak, penetrating all the way to his tunic, recalling Moonbear's defense of the prostitute in Shylar's whorehouse. Tazir was glad the barbarian could not witness the guardsman's antics. Growling his contempt, Hildegard grabbed a handful of the beggar's hair. "She's your sister, you bastard." Obviously frightened, the old woman lashed out wildly. Hildegard timed his dodge poorly. The woman's hand crashed into his groin. With an angry, pain-filled oath, the guard punched even as he doubled over. His fist struck her cheek with a resounding crack. She tumbled backward into the sewage trough. "Dirty old pig!" Hildegard spat on the struggling woman. Tazir had always felt a camaraderie with the drunkards and beggars who shared the city streets. Outraged, he tensed. His hand crept toward the hilt of his dagger. Still staggering slightly, Hildegard advanced. The beggar woman cringed with a cat-like hiss. Adlar caught Hildegard's forearm. "Enough! We're late already!" Hildegard glanced from the woman to his companions. Straightening his soggy uniform, he mumbled, "Shouldn't allow trash on the streets." The three guardsmen continued their patrol through the alleyway. Relief uncoiled Tazir's sweat and rain-soaked limbs. My father's men would never have beaten a helpless old woman. Recalling the captain's disdainful tales of guards' cruelty in other regiments, Tazir knew his thought as certainty. He paused, watching until the beggar worked her way free of the sewage trough. Turning, he slithered across the rooftop and peered into the parallel road. The street remained empty. Turning his gaze directly downward, Tazir recognized Moonbear hunched against the wall-boards. His massive frame and the strands of yellow hair poking from beneath his hood seemed out of place. Tazir gripped the roof edge and lowered himself over the side. Easily he found toe-holds in the moss between panels. He scrambled to the ground. "This way." He pointed in the direction from which the guards had come. "Shylar claims the Baron had troubled city patrols. We haven't much time." Swiftly, Tazir and Moonbear stole along the roadway. At the first crossroad, Tazir returned to the alley where the guardsman had mistreated the beggar woman. He continued in the opposite direction from the patrol, dodging past cottage and shop windows. As they walked, the sewage trough widened, but it still scarcely managed to contain the torrent of rain. Brown, stained water sloshed over its sides. Its faint but ever-present ammonia smell made Tazir's head ache. The alley ended abruptly in a circle of shops, as Tazir knew it would. Sewage water poured from the end of its trough into a man-made drain hole half hidden by the dirt of the roadway. Tazir knelt. The reek of human excrement gagged him. Many times in the past, he had considered hiding in the underground river which carried away Collinsburg's wastes, but always he had found a less repulsive option. Now, trapped by daylight and plagued by a reward which precluded all trust, Tazir grew more desperate. He examined the cascade of foaming water which twined into the ditch. "Moonbear, do you know what a sewer is?" Moonbear shook his head. "No." "Good." Tazir gulped a lungful of air, caught the edges of the hole, and swung his body down into it. Sewage water splashed his side. He released his grip. He fell a short distance, struck thigh-deep water with bent knees, and resisted his natural urge to roll to ease the fall. Despite dilution by rain and stream, the odor crushed down upon him. The caverns of the underground river rose to the height of a tall man, pitted and jagged as a cave. Current dragged at Tazir. He followed it a few steps to make room for Moonbear. A rat swirled past, its paws chopped water madly. Tazir tensed, then bit off an oath. "Damn my shattered nerves, it's only a rat." Behind him, a splash and a muttered expletive heralded Moonbear's arrival. Though foul, the reek of human waste soon became the least of Tazir's worries, as larger concerns necessitated concentration. Never having traversed the sewer, he did not know where it would lead. Its waterways and branches were unexplored territory. He could only surmise from distance and direction their corresponding location in the town overhead. Tizir focused his full attention on navigating the sewers, precluding conversation. As they traveled, he peered up drains, trying to determine his position in the city. He was grateful for the need to devote all his skill to finding his way through the sewer system, for it left him no time to brood about the incident in Shilar's whorehouse. As the day progressed, the water rose rapidly. By midday, it had reached the level of Tizir's waist. Tizir judged that he and Moonbear actually passed beneath the walls which enclosed Kallenberg's barony in the late afternoon. The torrent sucked and swirled about Tizir's chest, prodding him forward. Ahead, the warped sunlight which had seeped down the city's sewer drain holes disappeared, and darkness limited vision to arm's length. As far as he could discern, the cavern roof sloped downward. Tizir watched water lap faults in the walls, acutely aware of the growing lake of sewage. If the rain persists, water will fill this cavern. Strong as the current has already become, we may not be able to fight our way back to town. We have no choice but to turn around before the river overtakes us. Preparing to pivot, Tizir sidestepped. The bottom collapsed beneath his feet. A wave crashed against his ribs, driving him under. Current dragged him deeper. Tizir clawed to the surface and gulped air before the rushing waters closed over him again. Tossed like flotsam, he grabbed for the wall. Granite scraped skin from his knuckles. He grasped desperately for a handhold, kicking downward at the same time. His toes plowed through muck and struck stone. He wedged his fingers into cavern cracks, clung and heaved. His head broke water. Slowly, as if climbing, he worked his hands up the wall. The current pounded against his legs as he pulled himself halfway out of the water. Moon Bear! Testing his balance, Tizir loosened his hold on the wall. Moon Bear! His voice echoed through the chamber. Moonbear's gruff sing-song came from some distance behind Tizir. Are you well? As well as a person who nearly drowned in shit can be. Tizir freed one hand and wiped grit from his eyes, unable to suppress the sarcasm in his voice. Just stand fine. He released his grip, countering the current with shifts in position. Ahead, the sound of running water became the roar of a waterfall. Tizir stared at his macerated fingers, waiting for Moonbear to join him. I think we've reached the river. Water sloshed as Moonbear quickened his approach. Light filtered through the shaft that was now visible up ahead, painting gray shadows on the wall. Less water, more sun. Moonbear states the obvious like a child. Tizir stifled a chuckle, recalling his initial trepidation upon viewing Moonbear in the Baron's dungeon. Briefly, Tizir examined his companion. Moonbear's sodden cloak clung to his limbs, clearly defining the bulges and crevices of his muscled arms. He's a simple-minded boy with the body of a blacksmith. Hand pressed to the algae-slick wall, Tizir continued through the cavern. Moonbear followed. The river wound to the right. The cavern grew brighter and the water shallower with every step. Excitement plied Tizir. I'd give all I have for dry clothes and sunlight. The thought raised a grunt of realization. A fair trade, perhaps, as all I have is wet clothing, a dagger, and my kind, if slow-witted, barbarian companion. He turned to sharp left in the cavernway. Ahead, an iron grate spanned the tunnel. Between its bars, Tizir could see a rushing river bordered by green-leaved, twisted trees. Light poked through breaks in the clouds, highlighting every raindrop. Frustration wrenched a curse from Tizir. A Garen's inspired madness. Will luck always work against us? He approached the grate, aware they could no longer turn back until well after the rain had stopped completely. Fine stirrings of hunger and the realization they would need to sneak past perimeter patrols made the thought of return an undesirable option. Tizir considered. Why would Cullensburg's founders place a blockade across the sewer outlet? To keep fugitives from escaping? The idea seemed so ludicrous he discarded it. In drier times, this underground river must become thin as a grass snake. If not for this grate, an army could enter and attack Cullensburg without broaching the walls. Comfortable with his explanation, Tizir moved closer. To prevent enemies from prying down the grate, men must have installed it from our side. Therefore, we can uninstall it. Determined, Tizir tapped the grate. The iron shivered. Rust colored his fingers orange. He examined the structure more carefully. Though initially cut square, the grating had grown pocked and bent by years of rushing water. A film of rust covered each bar and the four-corner spikes which held the grate in place. Reaching down through the water, Tizir discovered one corner so eroded its spike no longer passed over it. Crossing to the other side, Tizir held the grate for support against the tumbling waters. Leaning over, he gripped the head of the opposite spike and pulled. The rust-pitted metal gave slightly. He jerked up, then suddenly downward. The joint slipped further. Tazir pumped the spike, feeling limestone chip around it. In moments, it fell free in his hands. Tazir rose, still clutching the spike which ran nearly the length of his forearm. While Moonbear wrapped his thick fingers around the spike in the far corner, Tazir dropped the iron bar and turned his attention to the remaining spike. Seizing its tip, he braced his feet and yanked. Pain seared through his shoulder. The spike remained immobile. Ah! Shaking his arm, Tazir glanced toward Moonbear. The barbarian was working his spike free with relative ease. Tazir gritted his teeth, reminded for the 100th time of the slightness of his stature in a world which valued strength. He wrapped his fingers about the remaining spike. Grimy water surged about his thighs. He threw his weight backward. The movement jarred agony through his strained muscles. The spike remained as fixed as a boulder. Moonbear stepped over to help. Eyes half closed from pain, Tazir kneaded his shoulder and waved Moonbear away. He snatched the freed spike from Moonbear. Wedging the tip beneath the head of the remaining spike, he levered downward. A cracking sound echoed through the cavern. The head of the embedded spike dropped into the water with a splash. The grate shifted, now held only by the force of the river. Relief loosened Tazir's frame, dulling pain to an ache. He watched Moonbear peel the grate downward. The metal fell and lay like an orange-brown rug beneath the waters. Crossing over it, Tazir continued along the river. Twilight haze grazed the shadows at the cave opening. Ahead, rain slanted through the forest, rolling from tear-shaped walnut leaves to the tangle of gooseberries beneath. A low waterfall spilled from the cavern. Tazir clung to the walls as the current grew stronger. He peered from the cave mouth, pleased to find ledges. A child could climb the rocks which framed the cavern. Stepping to one, he inched around the cascade and lowered himself to the river bank. Turning, he watched Moonbear traverse the same course and drop to the ground beside him. Rain pelted Tazir. Too wet to care, he welcomed its freshness after a half-day's journey through filth. Joy suffused him. We're free. Free! And the Baron can't know we passed the city walls. Stooping, he ran his hands through the river, washing away rust and filth. Yet doubts arose quickly to splinter excitement. I've a debt to pay against a traitor who resides in a city I cannot enter, and never having left Collinsburg before, I have no idea where to go. As if in answer to Tazir's unspoken question, Moonbear pointed away from Collinsburg. North. North, Tazir repeated. Accustomed to streets and shops, he found the direction ridiculously vague. Of course, north. North where? Moonbear passed Tazir, gliding into a stand of trees. Home. The word tore a hollow in Tazir's consciousness. Though unsure of the reason, he knew a loyalty to Collinsburg far beyond the patriotism inspired by his father. The walled city was the only world he had known since birth, the world where his parents had lived and died, a world with crisscrossed roadways and well-tended shops ruled by any underground sinner daring enough to thwart the Baron's laws. Now outside, Tazir rediscovered an uncertainty he had not experienced since childhood. His confidence and his obsession with action seemed to fade in an instant, as if the goal which had driven him to take on the impossible for 8 months remained, unfinished, within the city limits. The thought of the vast, strange lands beyond the barony, which should have seemed an exciting new challenge, only made Tazir uncomfortable. Forcefully, he shook water from his fingertips and strode after his companion. He stubbed his toe on a half-buried root. With a startled curse, he dropped to one knee. Swiftly, Moonbear passed from sight. Rising, Tazir blundered after Moonbear, irritated by his own sudden clumsiness. All his years spent perfecting city stealth had not prepared him for the forest. Dead limbs clawed his ankles. Briars rent holes in his cloak, occasionally scratching skin. Forced to guess his course, he fought through undergrowth. Soon he'd boxed himself between densely packed oaks and a fallen trunk. Unwilling to turn back, he clambered over the deadfall. Bark splintered beneath his fingernails. Swearing, he stumbled to the ground and watched with annoyance as Moonbear moved on without a rustle, leaving no signs of his passage. Sweat mingled with the rain on Tazir's limbs. He recalled how, at the time of his mother's death, pride kept him from leaving Collinsburg to become his uncle's smallest, weakest farmhand. Under ordinary circumstances, the same dignity might have spurred him to try to cover up his inexperience with woodland movement, but 7 days in a coma and hours slogging through sewage turned the task into an almost overwhelming labor. Moonbear's natural ability quickly inspired resentment. It reminded Tazir of his own incompetence. Pausing to work wood from beneath his nails with his teeth, he glanced around the forest. Some distance to his right, a faint glow penetrated between tree branches. He trotted toward it. Intertwined limbs ripped a clump of hair from his head. Repeatedly, he twisted his ankles on stones and roots, hidden beneath a shallow layer of leaves. The forest broke suddenly to a packed dirt path muddied by rain and scarred deeply by hoofprints. Puddles filled the ruts in the roadway. Yet, to Tazir, this crude roadway seemed as welcome as dry clothing. He started toward it. From nowhere, a hand gripped his shoulder. Tazir gasped, whirling to face Moonbear. The larger man shook his head. Road not safe. Tazir broke free. He pronounced each word with sullen force. Forest not safe, Moonbear. We need to know if we're being followed. Even Tazir recognized it as a lame excuse, but he knew he could travel more swiftly and comfortably on the road. Moonbear took no notice of Tazir's outburst. The road is not safe. He pointed southward. It leads to Collinsburg. Tazir gestured northward. Then I go this way. If anyone comes by, I'll see or hear them and hide. Tazir's bitterness cut the conversation short. He stepped onto the roadway, heading in the indicated direction. Moonbear disappeared back into the forest. Alone on the pathway, Tazir became intensely aware of gnawing hunger in his gut. Discretion and disgust had kept him from drinking sewage water, but a half day without water had parched his throat until even the road puddles seemed tempting. He plowed through mud, occasionally glimpsing Moonbear in the tangle of woods. Evening dragged into night. Tazir's hunger passed from pain to vague queasiness. The trees thinned, then broke to towering fields of wheat. Clearly visible against the background of stalks, Moonbear signaled Tazir closer. Town ahead. Back in the forest. We'll need to change direction. Town? An image of Collinsburg's tavern filled Tazir's mind. His gut ached, as if begging a home-cooked meal. Collinsburg's thrifty tavern master watered his beer, yet even his goods would seem gratifying. Ahead, then, we've need of warmth, rations, and a good night's rest. No. Moonbear stomped his cloth-shod foot. Perhaps because of his anger, his accent became heavier. Bad people live in towns. Tazir glanced down the roadway, cursing wasted time. We're outside Collinsburg and the Baron's influence. We're tired, soaked, and hungry. For a single bowl of beer, I'd steal a Garen's chalice all over again. He glared, and the day's resentment rushed forth unbidden. I've purposefully never left Collinsburg before. If I'm one of those bad people who live in towns, I'm not proud of it, but I make my money conning and stealing from others. The forest has no others. Moonbear's voice was barely audible. My people live in the forest. Tazir sighed, exasperated. Moonbear, can I have everything you're carrying? Without question, Moonbear reached into his pocket and produced a handful of stone arrowheads. He offered them to Tazir. Tazir bit his cheeks against a tart of sarcasm. I'd own everything your tribe has by midday. That's not much of a challenge. Moonbear pinched his lips into a pout. He returned the arrowheads to his pocket. I'm not going to Sweden. I'm just not interested. If that means we part company, let's at least spend our last night together under the wind and rain-sparing roof of an inn. Moonbear's expression was unreadable. Tazir pulled at his own sodden sleeve. All right. Moonbear forced a grin. All right. Having won this small battle, Tazir trotted on down the roadway. Rapidly, they passed ineptly crafted cottages which leaned, groaning, in the rain. Accustomed to Collinsburg's fortress walls and crowded dwellings, Tazir reached the central square before he even realized he had entered the village. A stone and wood building huddled in the middle of town. Dirt paths similar to the one they traversed radiated from it in a star pattern. Blocked granite steps rose to an iron-embossed door, darkly stained. An ornately shaped handrail led up the stairway, twisted from strips of tarnished copper. It seemed as if the inhabitants had chosen to bestow all their money on this structure rather than on their own meager dwellings. A man sprawled across the lowest step, dressed in ragged homespun pants and a baggy shirt. Regretting his promise of good food and lodgings, Tazir approached the stranger. Excuse me, could you direct me to an inn? The man screwed up his eyes and shook his head. Huh? Unable to interpret this reply, Tazir wiped wet palms on his wetter cloak and tried again. My friend and I need a place to eat and spend the night. The stranger sat up. His breath reeked of drink. His words slurred together, and an unrecognizable accent blurred his speech nearly to imperceptibility. Wynneth don't got no place like that. He spat at Moonbear's feet. Go on in the tavern. He made a throwing motion over his shoulder. Carl'll probably let you lay there before the kitchen fire for work price. Thank you. Tazir climbed the stairway with Moonbear close behind. As they approached the door, they could see light streaming beneath it. From beyond came the mingled roar of conversation, interspersed with laughter. Tazir tripped the latch and pushed. The door swung open easily to reveal a paneled common room. To Tazir's right stood 4 rectangular tables, splotched with beer and wine stains. 8 men huddled around 2 of the tables which had been pushed together. 5 wore carefully stitched homespun. The other 3 sported matching tunics of tan and black. Guardsmen. Tazir shivered in the rain. He forced down a welling discomfort. Winnis, guardsmen. They've no reason to harm us. As if to prove Tazir right, the men glanced in their direction only briefly, then continued their conversation. In the far corner, one of the tables had been pulled away from the others. A man in black robes of rich design sat there, his hair and beard the color of goldenrod. His skin appeared as pale as moonbear's. An overlong staff of odd design leaned against the wall beside him. Its end tapered to a black-nailed claw which enclosed a highly polished green jadestone. He seemed intent on a steaming plate of food and paid the newcomers no heed. A voice to Tazir's left startled him. "Come in, please. Shut the door. We preferred the rain outside." Tazir flushed, aware of the growing puddle at his feet. He entered along with Moonbear and closed the door behind him. He looked toward the speaker, a lean, aging man who stood behind a waist-high bar. Further along the thick, well-polished barrier, 3 men holding tankards snickered with a kind of high pitch indicative of too much to drink. Tazir approached the speaker, hoping the long wall through the rain had washed away the last clinging odor of sewage. "You're Carl?" A smile swept the older man's face. "I am. What can I do for you men?" His accent resembled that of the man on the porch steps, but his tone seemed friendly. "My companion and I need a place to stay the night." Tazir poked Moonbear's arm with his thumb. "We've no money, but we're willing to work." Carl squinted, examining the pair before him with alarming intensity. Straightening, he shrugged. "Kitchen'll make for cramped sleeping for 2, but you're welcome to stay. And I do have a task for you. Come with me." Briskly, he turned and whisked through a doorway behind the bar. Trotting to keep up, Tazir and Moonbear followed him. Carl led Tazir and Moonbear into a square-cut chamber. A huge stone cooking fireplace nearly filled one wall. A metal rod within it skewered a chicken. Fat droplets sizzled on the glowing coals beneath it. The aroma of roasting meat and potatoes wafted through the room, reawakening Tazir's hunger. Barrels, crates, and casks lined the opposite wall. 3 cockerels hung by their feet from the rafters. Blood parted trails through one's neck feathers, pattering to the table beneath it. Carl stopped before a thick white door at the far end of the room. "You from Collinsburg?" Tazir saw no reason to lie. "Yes." Carl tripped the latch and ushered Tazir and Moonbear into the night. "I once served in the Baron's army." Tazir's heart quickened. He studied Carl in the moonlight. Gray-streaked hair tumbled to the nape of his neck. Though thin, Carl sported a large frame and thick hands which suggested a previous robustness. Apparently noticing Tazir's appraisal, Carl shook his head. "Oh, I was big once. I fought years ago in the Barbarian Wars." He rubbed his hands together, regarded Moonbear closely, and suddenly seemed uncomfortable. Pointing to a cart and hitch in the yard, he changed the subject. "When my boy, Meyer, returns, you can help him unload the beer." Within the wagon stood a pair of barrels so wide they filled it completely. Tazir estimated each at 4 times his own meager weight. 3 men together should move them fairly easily. Agreed. Carl turned back toward the kitchen. Tazir followed him, but Moonbear remained, staring out over the pastures and fields of Wynneth. As Carl continued through the kitchen, Tazir paused. "Moonbear?" Moonbear raised a hand to indicate he heard. Suspecting Moonbear needed to relieve himself, Tazir smiled. "Come back inside when you're ready." Moonbear nodded. Tazir followed Carl back into the tavern. The older man strode to the largest table to take an order. Tazir took a seat before the bar. His stomach felt drawn tight. His throat burned. The raucous calls and laughter of the 3 soused men to his right quickly became an annoyance. Awaiting Carl and Moonbear, Tazir watched the men at the bar, pondering ways to convince the drunkards to part with some food and drink. The man nearest Tazir sported a red-brown beard soaked with beer foam. To his right, a burly man giggled like a girl over his half-eaten chicken. The last of the trio was a dark-haired giant of a man who appeared to be the leader. Snatches of boisterous conversation revealed his name to be Willamar. After a time, Carl retook his position behind the bar. Hoping to obtain a clue to his father's death, Tazir waved him over. "So you fought in the Barbarian Wars. What were they like?" Carl leaned across the counter, chin in his palms. "Truth?" Tazir nodded. Carl rolled his eyes to meet Tazir's gaze. Not the glorious, glamorous combat I expected as a young warrior. Those barbarians knew the forest like we knew the insides of our cottages. Not surprising when you realized the woods were their home. Carl pulled a wet rag from beneath the bar and flicked it across the already spotless counter. I remember how they seemed to come from nowhere to strike without sound. I lost many friends and comforted a lot of widows. Then I started wondering about the barbarians' widows and orphans. That's when I quit. I took my pay and opened this place. Moonbear appeared suddenly from the kitchen doorway. Crossing around the bar, he took a seat beside Tazir. Tazir confronted his companion. What took so long? Moonbear's shoulders rose and fell. I carried in the barrels. The pronouncement struck Tazir momentarily speechless. The idea of one man holding the casks seemed impossible. Wide-eyed, Carl peeked through the kitchen doorway. He turned back to Tazir, shaking his head in bewilderment. He did it. He indicated Moonbear with a toss of his head. Convenient companion to have along. Carl paused, apparently realizing he had never asked Tazir's name. Moonbear took the cue. He's Shadow. He's a thief. Horror stole Tazir's breath. Real damned convenient. He forced a weak smile, hoping Carl would take the revelation as Moonbear's simple-minded rambling. Carl screwed up his eyes and glanced from Tazir to Moonbear. What do you mean? Tazir drew breath in defense, but Moonbear spoke first, in the firm, matter-of-fact tone of a proud father. He takes things from people. Struggling to salvage his life, Tazir added quickly, He just means I take money with tricks. He recalled his early days with Cullenberg street rogues when his swiftness and agility predisposed him to pickpocketing and sleight of hand. Do you have a coin? Carl's features crinkled in mistrust, but he reached into his pocket and flipped a collared ducat onto the counter. Tazir placed his palm over the coin, watched carefully. He shuffled it rapidly from hand to hand, stopped, and worked it between his left, second, and third fingers. Distracting Carl with a toss of his head, he asked, Where's the coin? Carl indicated Tazir's left hand. Tazir raised it, revealing nothing beneath, then slipped the ducat into his pocket. He lifted his right hand to show the coin had disappeared. Carl laughed. He's right. You are a thief. I don't suppose I'll see my copper again, unless you use it to buy a drink. His gaze swept past Tazir. Excuse me a moment. Carl produced a glass, filled it with a deep purple wine, and strode toward the table of the black-robed Northman. Pleased by the quick thought and maneuvering which had rescued him from potential disaster, Tazir slapped the ducat down on the bar and awaited Carl's return. Confronting Moonbear, Tazir sought words to explain the conventions of civilization when Willimar's voice interrupted. Hey-yo, shadow thief, know any more tricks? Tazir turned. The hefty, dark-haired leader of the drinkers at the bar peered over the heads of his companions and met Tazir's gaze. Seizing the opportunity, Tazir rose and approached. As he passed Willimar's bearded friend, Tazir flicked his hand into the pocket of the man's homespun, tangled his fingers in purse strings, and freed the pouch with a deft twist. He made a subtle gesture to mask the action of slipping it into his own pocket. Faint stirrings of excitement rewarded the thief. It's been years since I've done any pilfering, but the skill is still there. Continuing his motion naturally, Tazir took a seat at the far side of Willimar. Tazir placed his elbow on a counter and faced Willimar. I also hustle drinks. Willimar imitated Tazir's position. He leaned closer. Fine, shadow thief. Hustle. The burly man beside him giggled. The bearded man choked on his drink. Tazir waited for their laughter to fade. I'll bet you a meal and a beer I can take your purse without you realizing it. Instinctively, Willimar's hand dropped to his pocket. His voice went shrill. Touch my money and die. Hoping he had not miscalculated, Tazir answered quickly. Fine, then. I'll bet meals and drinks for me and my friend I can take his purse. He gestured at the bearded man, without either of you noticing. Willimar judged the distance between Tazir and his chosen victim. He chuckled. I'll take that bet. Give it a try. The bearded man stiffened. Hey, you can't. Grinning wickedly, Tazir displayed the bearded man's purse. The man swore. He snatched back his property. Willimar doubled over with laughter. His fat friend's belly heaved, emitting rumbling chortles. As Carl returned to the bar, Willimar waved him over. Feed Shadow and his friend on me. Having obtained dinner, Tazir saw no further reason to continue petty conman's antics. He returned to his seat beside Moonbear. Carl headed into the kitchen and re-emerged with 2 plates, each with half a chicken and several small potatoes, smothered with thin yellow gravy. Wisps of smoke curled toward the ceiling. Carl placed the dinners before Tazir and Moonbear. Enjoy. Willimar must have sold a good crop to become so generous. He nodded toward the dark-haired leader, then hunkered closer to Tazir's ear. That, or he's drunker than he thinks. He winked. He went to the kitchen and brought 2 bowls filled with froth-capped beer. Food and drink had never tasted so good to Tazir. In his mouth, the food seemed to turn into the finest fried beefsteak. The beer eased the pain in his throat. Oblivious to every other thing in the common room, he bolted down the meal. Then, feeling bloated but happy, he leaned back in his chair. The bearded man approached Tazir. Freeing his purse, he dumped 3 silver ducats on the countertop. Yours, all of it, if you can steal anything from the Norsemen. He inclined his head toward the lone, blond patron in the corner. Tazir frowned, aware several silver coins must seem a fortune to a farmer in a town as small as Wynneth, but Tazir had given larger sums to orphans in Collinsburg streets. I just hustle meals, I'm not for hire. With a growl of disgust, Carl shoved the ducats at the bearded man. Stop it, Tabbert. I'll not have you sending a man to die for sport. He made a motion toward the door. Get out of here. Mumbling veiled apologies, Tabbert reached for his coins, but Carl's words had turned the bet into a challenge. Despite attempts to hold curiosity in check, Tazir's interest sparked at the thought of a theft deemed impossible by an ex-warrior who must have served under Tazir's father. Wait. He caught Tabbert's arm. Who is this Norseman? Carl glowered at Tabbert. A stranger. Calls himself Mordath. I don't know who he is, but he claims he's dragon rank. The word meant nothing to Tazir. Dragon rank? Dragon rank, said Tabbert, as if repeating the word could serve as clarification. Carl tapped his fingers against the bar. Dragon ranks are just mother stories. Sorcerers from the north who supposedly steal away bad children, and can create or destroy at will. But this mad Norseman really believes he's dragon rank. Stay away. Carl trotted off to fill another's order. Tazir paused, knowing it was best to heed Carl's warning, yet enticed by the opportunity to perform against steep odds. Knowing himself too well, he sighed. I'll take your bet. Committed now, Tazir turned. Mordath sat with the wine glass pressed against his lips, his attention seemingly unfocused. His posture was that of a man withdrawn into some private reverie. His hands looked as smooth as a princess. The jade stone at the tip of his staff appeared to flicker and pulse in the candlelight. Tazir's heart pounded in the familiar, slow cadence which came whenever he faced a task of such immensity. His restlessness returned. For an instant, time seemed to reverse, and he stood before his father's corpse. Then, shrugging with impatience at his lapse, Tazir put aside all memory of the past he could not change. For the duration of the attempted theft, excitement would whip him to a frenzied intensity which would preclude all extraneous thoughts. Tazir threaded around chairs and tables, approaching Mordath with a swaggering gait. The Norseman ignored him, apparently absorbed in the bouquet of his wine. Arriving at the corner table, Tazir hooked a chair with his foot, thrust it backward between his legs, and leaned across the carven rail of its back. Mind if I join you? Mordath raised his head with the slow deliberateness of a baron. His eyes glimmered, blue-green and as sharp as a house cat's. His accent echoed Moonbear's, but his words sounded more crisp and refined. Would you have me tell your future? The question was unexpected. Tazir shifted in his chair, trying to look nonchalant. If you'd like. Beneath the table, his fingers crept toward the other man. Mordath's face locked in an expressionless paw. The hand on his glass made circles, sloshing a last mouthful of wine. He made an arching gesture with his other arm. Tazir's hand skittered from the fox-fur-lined rim of Mordath's robe to the corner of a pocket. He edged his fingers inside and came upon a smooth, rectangular gemstone. A sibilant quality entered Mordath's voice. I see a sudden, violent death at the whim of an irate dragon-rank sorcerer. Tazir winced, hoping the Norseman's rage was channeled at him merely because of his presence, rather than due to awareness of the theft. A sharp burst of adrenaline made Tazir's hand shake, hampering his effort to grip the stone. Mordath's fist crashed against the tabletop. Witless servant, leave me before I set you and this broken-down box of timber to flame. Tazir recoiled, using the movement to flick the stone into his palm. He slipped it into his breast pocket, disguising the motion by raising both hands in a gesture of surrender. Forgive me, he stood hurriedly. I didn't mean to anger you. Mordath's feline eyes narrowed. His gaze focused beyond Tazir. He raised his arm with the bold commitment of a dancer. From habit, Tazir retreated past the range of a physical blow. The Norseman's movement seemed eerily unnatural. Could this man really be a sorcerer? The very idea seemed ludicrous, yet doubt clung in Tazir's mind. His eyes were trained on the uplifted hand. Suddenly, Mordath's thumb and middle digit pressed together and then separated with a distinctive snap. His forefinger beckoned. From the periphery of his vision, Tazir glimpsed Carl approaching, wine bottle in hand. Mordath only wants a drink. The realization made Tazir feel foolish. Sweat congealed on his limbs. He started back toward Willamar at a confident trot. Once at the bar, he dropped into the chair. Like vultures, the drinkers surrounded Tazir. Tabert hissed, "Did you take something?" Briefly, Tazir glanced over his shoulder. Mordath sipped at his freshly filled wine glass, head tilted toward the ceiling. Carl was bustling toward the bar. "Yes, I took—" He paused dramatically. "Abuse." Willamar loosed a guttural noise. His fat companion drew a handful of coins from his pocket and reached toward Tabert, obviously paying a private wager on Tazir's presumed failure. Quick as fire, Tazir hooked the fat man's sleeve. "I also took this." He retrieved the gemstone and tossed it casually to the countertop. It was jade, milky green and intricately cut, and shaped to resemble a faceted diamond, twinned to the stone which graced the clawed tip of Mordath's staff. An oil lamp behind the bar carved shadows on its flattened surfaces. Abruptly, light spread like a spider along each edge, intensified the glaring white, and exploded in a flash as brilliant as lightning. Tazir leaped to his feet. Willamar's chair tumbled to the floor. Oblivious to the shocked gasps of his companions, Tazir glanced across the common room. Mordath rose, his eyes wrenched open as wide as unshuttered beacons, and the object of his scrutiny was obviously the jadestone on the bar. Words failed Tazir. The quick wit which had rescued him from violence in the past seemed to have abandoned him completely. He clamped a damp palm over the stone and whisked it into a pocket. The effort was ill spent. There could be no doubt Mordath had seen it. Mordath's hands drifted to his violated pocket. His lips oozed into a smile. His mouth writhed open in soundless laughter. With the calm manner of a courtier, he tossed down the last mouthful of wine and scattered several oddly shaped gold coins on the table. Disinterested in the worried stares of everyone present, he strode across the room, through the door, and out into the night. The click of the latch echoed loudly in the oppressive silence of the common room. Tazir remained still, flushed with disbelief. The tension in the tavern grew unbearable. Willamar's veined fist gripped the bar. Tabert's lips pursed in alarm. Suddenly, Carl sprang forward. He tore at a fold in Tazir's cloak, and his unbridled curses shattered the stillness with a cyclone's force. Anxiety and uncertainty masked most of Carl's words. Tazir identified blasphemies and insults interspersed between the fluttering of "I told yous." Unable to concentrate on the blustering barkeep, Tazir turned his attention to the occupants of the tavern. The largest table's occupants had dwindled to two, neither wearing the tan and black tunics Tazir had noticed on first entering the common room. From some distance came the growing cadence of hoofbeats. Soldiers? Tazir felt goose flesh prickle his skin. A village this small couldn't afford a mounted army. Carl's admonishments flowed past him like unintelligible music. Something just didn't make sense. Would Winethian guards summon aid from Collinsburg? Tazir spoke softly, but his urgency transcended Carl's tirade. "How long ago did the guardsmen leave?" Carl released Tazir. "Huh? Are you listening to me?" Tazir declined to answer. "How long ago did the guardsmen leave?" "Guardsmen? You mean the men in the uniforms?" Tazir nodded. Though his anger had not fully died down, Carl managed a weak smile. "Tax collectors from Collinsburg. Wynneth's far too small for soldiers. The Baron would never let one of his farm holdings have its own army." "Collinsburg? Holding?" Realizing he had not answered Tazir's question, Carl finished. "They left long ago, while you were winning dinner from Willamar." "Long enough to have reached Collinsburg and returned." Tazir berated his carelessness with silent curses. The hoofbeats in the town square were unmistakable now. Lantern light swam through the dusty window. "I think it's time we departed." He started toward the exit. The door crashed open suddenly. 6 men stood in the portal, dressed in the crisp red and black of Collinsburg's army. Even as Tazir recognized his peril, the commander raised his arm and pointed directly at Moonbear.